Interestingly, in 1885, Theodore Maynard wrote a famous book titled Disease of the Forebrain. In this book he wrote a small introduction, and in that introduction he wrote that the term psychiatry is an historic term in the sense that the term psych, treatment of the soul, is unscientific and thus unrelated to what we can achieve in science. So he coined this term psychiatry in 1800 as historic, indicating that it should not be used. Ironically, his student, his resident, Sigmund Freud, took this term and made it very famous, titling his theories as psychoanalysis, and thus progressing forward a new direction that would become psychology, and later on will help psychiatry become an independent discipline from neurology. Well, I think it is time to make an historic correction and follow the suggestion by Theodore Maynard, and I think a new science of the future of psychiatry could be called NeuroAnalysis, taking the term psych and substituting it by the term neuro, which is a more scientific term that we can understand. So neuroanalysis can be a good terminology for bringing back and even uniting neurology and psychiatry, and under this title we can reformulate mental disorders as brain disorders. And we can take an example from Theodore Maynard. He in 1800 already talked about a connectivity structure in the brain, a basic connectivity structure which is a substrate of individuality and which represents the experience of each one of us. And he called this connectivity structure, he called it ego. So the term ego is actually some kind of basic fundamental connectivity organization of the brain. And his resident, Sigmund Freud, took this term and talked about it theoretically, unrelated to the brain, and that's how psychology was born. What I think is a genius prediction by Theodore Maynard is the fact that today we know that there is a connectivity neural network, resting state neural network, or typically called the default mode network, which is a basic network in the brain. And since psychologists attributed personality disturbances to malfunctions of ego organization, we can assume that we would predict or assume that in the future we can find disturbances to the default mode network in personality disorders. And actually there are a few papers today that begin to show that there is abnormality in the organization of the default mode network in the brains of people suffering from personality disorder. So you can see how the origins from Theodore Maynard until today are beginning to take form, in the sense that there is no need for psychological formulation and descriptive formulations which are unrelated to the brain. For example, in psychosis, this was also predicted by Maynard. Maynard said that in psychosis, there are weakening of connections of the default mode network. And in recent years we have an explosion of literature talking about disconnection dynamics in psychosis. So you can see that the terminology of psychosis and schizophrenia probably can be substituted in the future, in the near future, by terminology like connectivity disturbances, aberrant connectivity, overconnectivity, disconnectivity, and so on. Terminology which is related to the brain and which is scientific. Actually, there is enough literature today, I think, and enough knowledge to begin an advanced formulation for all the mental disorders based on disturbances to complex dynamic neural networks. And this can be predicted and formulated under an umbrella, a terminology which could be, I think a relevant terminology for that could be clinical brain profiling. Clinical meaning related to the clinical phenomenology, and brain profiling meaning some kind of analysis or brain-related formulation. So clinical brain profiling could be a good name for a future formulation, for a future diagnostic system in psychiatry. And actually there is a literature published on this topic which I have tried to formulate in the last 20 years. And I think it is time, I think science is advanced enough, and it is time for us to begin and try this attempt to make this jump from a descriptive psychiatry which is unrelated to any part of the body and the brain, and reformulate it as brain disturbances. There is a website, NeuroAnalysis, titled NeuroAnalysis. All you have to do is type NeuroAnalysis in Google, neuroanalysis.org.il, and you will get a few web pages. And if you go to the clinical brain profiling web page, you have a checklist of signs and symptoms which you can check. And then you scroll down and there is a button, a clinical brain results button. You press this button and you get a formulation, a vector presentation with entries of a formulation that predicts different disturbances in the brain of this specific patient. So it is also a personalized medicine, personalized diagnosis. And now it is the time to create a group of scientists that would be clinicians together with neuroscientists, people from neuroimaging, physicists of complex systems, and together develop this framework, this clinical brain profiling framework, and make it validated. The clinical brain profiling framework is only theoretical, and it's only a starting point. It's only a general framework for conceptualizing and beginning to develop a neuroscientific psychiatry. So it needs development, and most of all it will need validation. And validation will need the collaboration of clinicians with brain imaging and complex system scientists. Such a group of scientists, researchers and clinicians is being formed in these days. It will be organized also on the web, so it will be a web-based group. And of course you are invited to participate in this important group and to make part of this adventure of progressing psychiatry into the future. Become neuroanalysts and provide future psychiatrists with a neuroscientific diagnostic system, and neuroscientific psychiatry will probably be more effective in treating and really curing mental disorders. You will find my email at the NeuroAnalysis website. My email is neuroanalysis at gmail.com, NeuroAnalysis in one word at gmail.com. Please write to me and join this group.